Let's talk about this subject that I've covered definitely back when I used to do long form videos a lot. Covered extensively, covered many, many times. And it's two concepts. And this, because it's being talked about again regarding speech, we know what's happening with Elon Musk thing and Twitter. I want to talk about private property rights and as it pertains to speech. Okay. Now, just for a point of reference, a video that I did, it only has like 6,000 views. It flew under the radar. I talked about it's titled Understanding Free Speech. And a lot of what I'm going to be talking about in today's segment is me reiterating things that I've said. Now, there's a couple of aspects of this that I want to discuss. And first and foremost, understanding what a right is. And using it in a way that is operable, rather effective in terms of language. Right is something that, you know, you obviously have as an individual. So every human being has it, that you can do essentially with impunity unless it is an act of aggression upon some other person. And when you look at it like that, all rights are private property rights, and they extend from said private property rights. The great Rothbard, we're going to go through some of this stuff and how he breaks it down. And I know this is, my freedom of speech, my Constitution, and all these things, my Bill of Rights that people are going to bring up. And rights, hell, even actually in terms of what it is that I'm talking about, that your beloved founders don't agree with you guys who believe that rights come from the government, because they don't. At all. But now that we got that out the way, understanding that extends for private property rights, you have to first start with the concept of self-ownership. And that is that every individual owns their body, and therefore nobody has a right to use aggression upon them. And that does not mean that you could sell another person. That's not what it is that we're talking about, because that would be like the great, rest in peace, Dr. Walter E. Williams would say that slavery is the forcible use of one person to serve the purposes of another. It is the most egregious violation of private property rights is this sort of chattel slavery. Now, we got that out the way in terms of what's a right, that it's inherent in every single individual, and that even, well, I guess before I move on, another thing about rights, we often misspeak. I've made this mistake before in the past as well, where you unfortunately fall down the line of thinking that it's granted by the government. I'm not falling down that line. That's not what it is I'm saying. But you will say, let's say, these people don't have the rights. Let's say if it's homosexuals getting thrown off the fucking roof in the Middle East, you'd say that they don't have the right to exist as gay people, I guess, in pockets of the Middle East. Well, that's a misassessment. More so, the governments in those geographical areas are violating the rights of those people. So even if you went to some place where, in some places it is, where legally rape or something like that is legal, that does not mean that it's righteous, because it's not. No matter if they called it legal, it is still an act of aggression, and it is therefore wrong. So it's not that they're taking away your rights. It's not that they don't have the rights. It's that they are actively using more so acts of aggression upon you, and therefore violating your rights. So with that being said, we talk about speech, and this has been the topic of conversation. So they look at, let's say, the rights of free speech. Again, going back to what I just said, a lot of people conflate the ability to do with the right to do something. Those are two completely different concepts, right? So you would get some people that would suggest, well, would it be with like the rule of law, or whether it be the ability to, like, if there's not some sort of protection in line, you don't actually have that right. Again, that's complete fucking nonsense. Even your beloved founders didn't agree with that concept. The right to do it does not rely upon one's ability to protect it. Again, This is how we decipher between what is righteous and what is just based upon our concept of what an actual right is. So just because you have successfully punched someone in the face does not mean that you had the right to do that. OK, so it's important that you understand that when we move on to what we're going to talk about with speech, because I've said before, and some folks don't like that I've said it, there exists no actual such separate right to quote unquote free speech. With that being said, the great Rothbard has broken this down many and many times. And when you hear this, in which we're going to read some of these excerpts, it'll make sense for you. So as he discussed, take, for example, the human right of free speech. It's coming from great Murray Rothbard. Freedom of speech is supposed to mean the right of everyone to say whatever he likes. But the neglected question is, where? Where does a man have this right? He certainly doesn't have it on property on which he is trespassing in. In short, he has this right only either on his own property or on the property of someone who has agreed as gift or in a rental contract to allow him on the premises. In fact, then, there is no such thing as a separate right to free speech. There's only a man's property right, the right to do as he wills with his own, or to make voluntary agreements with other property owners. Now, when you hear that, because you've been led to believe that this free speech thing is a thing in the first place, you start clutching your pearls. And then some people would have this be basically meaning that the government in itself does not have the right to, like, be it censor you or forcefully silence you or something. And I think all of us would certainly agree that they don't have that right. But where people start, the waters get muddy is when you talk about these other instances where folks are under this moronic impression that they can say or do whatever the fuck they want with impunity on other people's fucking private property, and that's complete and utter nonsense. You don't get to do that. In fact, to suggest that you do is communistic, socialistic nonsense. That's what it is, because you're essentially saying that you're saying whatever you want. You should have no ramifications. You should have no consequences, even if you're doing it upon someone else's private property. And they may have rules, whether it be like I own a restaurant or something, and I have even if it's in like a dress code or in we don't want you speaking loudly, and you come in there and do it, to act like I don't have the right to get your bitch ass the fuck up out of there. Again, it's socialistic, communistic nonsense. And continuing going, a person does not have the right to freedom of speech. What he does have is the right to hire a hall and address the people who enter the premises. He does not have a right to the freedom of press. What he does have the right to is to write or publish a pamphlet and to sell that pamphlet to those who are willing to buy it, or to give it away to those who are willing to accept it. Thus, what he has in each of these cases is property rights, including the right of free contract and transfer, which form a part of such rights of ownership. There is no extra right to free speech or free press beyond the property rights that a person may have in any given case. Furthermore, couching the analysis of right to free speech instead of property rights leads confusion and the weakening of the very concept of rights. The most famous example is Justice Holmes' contention, now remember, this is back in like the 70s, that one has the right to shout fire falsely, in a crowded theater, and therefore that right to freedom of speech cannot be absolute, but must be weakened and tempered by the considerations of the public policy. And yet, if we analyze the problem in terms of property rights, we will see that no weakening of absoluteness of rights is necessary. It's not, because in said theater, the theater owner can have a rule where they say you can shout this shit out or you can't shout this shit out. Otherwise, we got to get you the fuck up out of here. That's well within their property rights per se to do. 4, and this is going to be the last deal that I read. Just 4, logically, the shouter is either a patron or the theater owner. If he is the theater owner, he is violating the property rights of the patrons in the quiet enjoyment of the performance for which he took their money in the first place. Contractual obligation. If he is another patron, then he is violating the property right of the patrons to watching the performance and the property right of the owner, for he is violating the terms of his being there. For those terms surely include not violating the owner's property by disrupting the performance he is putting on. In either case, he may be prosecuted as a violator of private property rights. Therefore, when we concentrate on the property rights involved, we see that Holmes' case implies no need for the law to weaken the absolute nature of rights because it's not necessary. The rights are. And this is what's gotten a lot of the West certainly in trouble, and why you have so many people that think it's the government's job to be involved in so many different things, because they've extended these concepts of rights to mean things that they don't actually mean. And sometimes you get the shit end of the stick. But if you are a principled person, definitely those of you that act like you value liberty or capitalism, which I guess go hand in hand, you don't want to get in a situation where you are basically being a hypocrite in this regards, where you are allowing certain acts of aggression to exist because you want to be able to do something. But again, it all goes back to the simple fact that private property rights and everything extending from them actually does not complicate this issue. It simplifies it. I think definitely those that advocate for governments, that's what they've historically done, is that they attempt to make very simple concepts complex in order to justify their particular acts of aggression, or what they want to do is rule over certain people. And so they say, well, this is my right or inherent right to do that, or I must have this power because without it, you wouldn't be able to do X and O. And that's gotten us in the certain mess that we have right now. So take that into consideration. I would encourage you to watch my video of that. And if you're watching this, let's say on YouTube, this segment, I'll make sure that it's pinned and you'll be able to check that out. But go check that out where we break that down. And these are some concepts that some people haven't even heard. But once you hear it broken down in that way, it makes sense, because we often agree on this certain idea. It's just how we communicate that is where we differentiate. So there's that.
You just listened to a clip from my podcast, For Canon's Sake, which is live throughout the week at 12 p.m. Central on youtube.com/YoungRipper59 and odyssey.com/@YoungRipper59. Be sure to check out my website, ericdjuly.com, so you can stay up to date with everything it is that I'm doing. You can also become a member and get access to a bunch of cool perks and exclusive content, which includes a social media hub where you can interact with myself and other members. It even has an app that you can get, which is now live in the Google and Apple stores.